Good morning, everybody. I'm showing 9 o'clock on the dot, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everybody to the Pennsylvania Post-School Outcome Survey webinar for Cohort 5. Those that are participating on the webinar today should be those who were identified on the September 2019 Penn link that will be completing the exit surveys for this school year. My name is Hillary Mangus, and I work with the Pennsylvania Training and Technical Assistance Network, or PATN, and I am the co-lead for secondary transition for the state of Pennsylvania, and also the coordinator of the Indicator 14 PA post-school outcome process. Also presenting on today's webinar is my colleague Lisa Russo from our office in the East, and monitoring the Q&A feature for today is our colleague from Harrisburg, Ryan Romanowski. Just as a reminder, if you are on today's webinar, you should be those LEAs in Cohort 5 that will complete the exit surveys this year. If by some chance you are participating and you are from Cohort 4 and you completed the exit surveys last year, please note that you will not have a webinar for the post-school survey until the spring, and a training announcement will be issued at a later date. I want to take a moment to orient you to where the handouts are for today. I did post a link in the chat, but in addition, let me walk you through. If you give me a minute, I have to stop my screen share and share a new screen with you, so bear with me for one moment, please. So the event handouts for today can be found on the PATN training calendar by clicking on today's date and today's webinar, and you'll see in the event files the handouts for today's webinar. There will be a copy of the PowerPoint for you, a blank exit survey to download, information about the structure for the intermediate unit and PATN transition consultant contacts, and then 2 documents about strategies for contacting hard-to-find youth that will be referenced throughout the webinar today. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with the webinar. I want to remind you that today's webinar is being recorded. I want to make sure that you are hearing okay. So if you're hearing everything or not hearing, you might want to check the test computer audio or join via telephone if you're having technical difficulties with the sound. Sometimes the bandwidth when you're connecting with your computer audio makes it difficult. The phone connection usually works a little bit better. As a reminder, we have muted all participants. You can reach the presenters by using either the chat feature or the question and answer feature on the screenshot shown below. If there are questions, we encourage you to use the Q&A option, and we will address them either live or via a live response on the question and answer part of today's session. We will be monitoring the questions in the Q&A feature. And in addition, we have our support person, Paula Quinn, who may also be able to provide assistance for you. Please note that today's webinar is being recorded and will be archived on the PATN website. The mission of the Pennsylvania Training and Technical Assistance Network, or PATN, is to support the efforts and initiatives of the Bureau of Special Education and to build the capacity of local educational agencies to serve students who receive special education services. In secondary transition, we support LEAs across the state to meet the federal requirements through the Office of Special Education Programs, or OSEP. Indicator 14 is one of those requirements, and we'll talk about that as we go through today's presentation. Our goal for each child is based on the Pennsylvania Department of Education's commitment to the least restrictive environment, which is that we begin through the IEP process with the general education setting with the use of supplementary aids and services before considering a more restrictive environment. Those of us working in secondary transition should always be working to prepare students ages 14 to 21 to be as successful as possible to transition into school and or work. And ideally, this happens through the least restrictive environment. So a little bit of logistics for today's session, again, reminding you that we are recording and keeping track of the attendance on today's webinar. If you are participating in today's webinar as a group, we're asking you to please email pquinn@patn.net. So that we can keep track of your attendance. We want to make sure that everyone receives the information that is required of Indicator 14, and if we are aware that someone was not on the webinar that needs to be, we will have someone from their intermediate unit or patent be in contact with that LEA to get them the required information and materials. I did show you where today's materials are, so you should have available to you the IU and Patent Transition Consultant Support Structure for PaPOS 2019-2020, Contacting Hard-to-Find Youth, Strategies for the Post-School Survey. That document comes to us from the National Technical Assistance Center for Transition and gives information about preparing the students that are going to be completing the exit survey for the post-school survey for the next school year. In addition, we have a document that is based on schools that have gone through the PaPOS process and been successful, so strategies to contact youth for the PaPOS process, lessons learned from Pennsylvania schools, as well as today's PowerPoint. At this time, I'd like to take a few minutes to go over the Pennsylvania State Performance Plan as it relates to the Post-School Outcome Survey and the background information from Indicator 14 that is associated with it. I think I've corrected the issue with the slides that you're seeing, so hopefully that has fixed the problem. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA 2004, included many provisions that are designed to improve the education of students with disabilities. The framework that many states are using to make improvements is the State Performance Plan, SPP, Annual Performance Report, APR. Under IDEA 2004, all states are required to submit an SPP APR to the United States Department of Education, Office of Special Education Programs. The plan is built around 17 federally required indicators of compliance and performance. Each state sets measurable and rigorous targets for each year of the SPP APR and must implement effective improvement strategies to reach these targets. Each state must also report annually on their performance in meeting the targets. And this information must be reported to the public on the performance of all local education agencies, school districts, charter schools, etc. on the targets. The indicators were set by OSEP, but each state sets its own targets. Stakeholders are actively involved in setting targets and in determining whether the targets continue to be appropriate. As was mentioned, Indicator 14 is related to the state's performance plan, which is required under OSEP. This slide shows you the indicators on the SPP APR. And as a reminder today, we are covering Indicator 14 post-school outcomes. We're going to talk about your obligation for collecting data for the state, which will be reported to OSEP related to post-school outcomes. On this slide, what you can see is the connectedness of the various indicators that relate to secondary transition. We ask you to look at these starting from the bottom and working your way up. In general, these indicators should be looked at together when making informed decisions about secondary transition program successes and areas of need. We start with the foundation, which is high-quality, rigorous, standards-aligned secondary school programming for all students. Indicator 13, which is the high-quality IEPs that are designed to help students achieve their post-secondary goals, relates to our compliance with transition requirements. We know that if we have at the foundation high-quality, standards-aligned programming for all students and well-written, compliant IEPs, we are more likely to see students stay in school and graduate, which aligns to indicators 1 and 2. And then specifically, once they leave school, they're more likely to achieve their post-school goals, which is indicator 14. Remember, our goal is that for every student, regardless of their background, condition, or circumstance, that they will be proficient in core subjects, they will graduate from high school ready for post-secondary education and career, and are capable of achieving high outcomes. There's another resource that we'd like to share with you today, and it is the National Technical Assistance Center on Transition, which is also known as NTACT. This organization was created by incorporating several former national organizations, including the National Post-School Outcomes Center, which deals specifically with Indicator 14. This is the organization that published the handout on contacting hard-to-find youth, which I shared with you at the beginning of the presentation. It also was formed by the National Secondary Transition Technical Assistance Center, which dealt specifically with Indicator 13. And then finally, the National Dropout Prevention Center for Students with Disabilities, which dealt with Indicators 1 and 2. If you were to visit the NTACT site, you would see a host of transition resources available to you, including the ones directly related to Indicator 14 and post-school outcomes, which you can see highlighted by the arrow. When we started to pursue Indicator 14 data back in 2005, there are two main goals that were identified: to make sure that we were meeting not only the federal requirements set by OSEP, but also collecting information to help us inform program improvements to result in better post-school outcomes for youth with disabilities. In Pennsylvania, the system that we use to collect this data is a stratified random sampling process, which helps identify the various cohort groups. 1/5 of the schools across Pennsylvania are chosen and will participate one time every 5 years. There is one exception to this, and that is the School District of Philadelphia. Because they have over 50,000 students, the District of Philadelphia participates and are surveyed every year. But only 1/5 of the high schools across Philadelphia School District participate every year, not every high school. Again, you are part of Cohort 5, and for those of you that have been in your district for longer than 5 years, you've probably participated in this process before. Let's talk a little bit about the sampling variables that create the cohort lists. These are the areas that help Pennsylvania create the random sample. So one of the considerations is district size. We have an equitable distribution of urban, suburban, rural, and charter schools. In addition, disability category breakdown, ethnicity, LRE status, or the percent of time students spend in the general education setting, and gender all factor into the sampling variables. We need to talk a little bit about what the specific language is in the federal indicator for 14, specific to language regarding which students we'll be talking about. And as you can see from this slide, it is a three-pronged process. Specifically, we are looking at the youth who had IEPs and who will be exiting from high school. So those students who will be graduating, who will age out or drop out, and then where they are 1 year outside of high school. We want to look specifically at those that are enrolled in higher education, those who are enrolled in higher education or are competitively employed, and those that are enrolled in higher education or some other type of post-secondary training or are competitively employed or in some other type of employment. Basically, we're looking to see if students are doing what they said they were going to be doing, and if we have prepared them to be where they wanted to be 1 year after they left high school. In Pennsylvania, we also collect information about the student's status towards independent living, which you'll see when we show you the survey. One of the things that's important to remember is that this is a 2-year process. This year, what you'll be doing is collecting information for students who are leaving your school or who will be leaving your school during the 1920 school year. As an LEA, you are notified of your need to participate in this survey through a pen link. Next year, what you'll be asked to do is utilize the information you're gathering this year to follow up with those exact same students 1 year outside of them leaving school to complete the post-survey with them. You'll also be notified by a pen link regarding your required participation in the post-school survey. Again, we are looking specifically at those youth who have IEPs and will be exiting from high school, so those students who are graduating aging out, or dropped out during this school year, and where they'll be 1 year from this school year. Again, we want to look to see if the student identified is participating in higher education, is enrolled in higher education, or is competitively employed, or is enrolled in higher education or some other post-secondary training or competitive employment or other type of employment. So you may be wondering to yourself at this point if you're going to have to come up with a list of students on your own, or if we will be giving you the list. The answer to that is that we give you a list of potential leavers, but you as the LEA will be responsible for making sure that the list is accurate. So as Cohort 5, you will be given a list of leavers based on your 12/1/2018 child count data. This data is specifically pulled for students with IEPs between the ages of 16 and 20. We are not able to utilize more current data from this December 1st, 2019 child count because it will not yet be available. Those students from your December 1st, 2018 child count data are considered as possible leavers for the 1920 school year. But since the data is from 2018, this list will incorporate students who have already left school, as well as some of those who may not yet be leaving. Please understand that because of the process used to draw the survey sample, you as the LEA are responsible to review all potential students listed and create your accurate list of actual leavers for the 2019-2020 school year. At this time, let's take a look at the group of students who will comprise your survey population. So we will be including students who are graduating with your high school diploma, any student who has dropped out of school or will drop out of school during this school year, any student who reaches the maximum age during this school year, and any student who has received a GED during this school year. So let's look more specifically at the criteria to be considered a leaver. For a student who is graduating with a high school diploma, we are looking specifically at any student with an IEP who graduated with a high school diploma between September 1st, 2019 and June 30th, 2020. Similarly, students who drop out with an IEP between 9/1/2019 and 6/30/2020 should be included and administered an exit survey this year and a post-survey next year. We also need to include any students who reached maximum age between September 1st, 2019 and June 30, 2020. Note that if they are selected to leave due to maximum age if they are not graduating with a high school diploma. And also, we want to consider and include any student who is receiving a GED with an IEP between September 1st, 2019 and June 30, 2020. One extra note here, because we often get asked this question, is that if a student's IEP team decides that a student is leaving at 18 and they are graduating with a high school diploma, you want to make sure that you include those students. But if they reach the maximum age of 21 and exit school, you're going to want to check the box that says they've reached the maximum age. We do have some exceptions to students who may be part of your list of potential leavers who may not actually exit between September 1st, 2019 and June 30th, 2020. And these exceptions could include the scenario on this slide as well as the scenario on the next slide. On this slide, you'll see the scenario where a student turns 21 on March 15th, 2020, and will be staying throughout the rest of the term, which is ending on May 31st, 2020. Although graduation was to be held on June 2nd, 2020, the student qualifies for and will be attending extended school year through July 31st, 2020. You still would want to include this student in your exit scenario and administer the exit survey, even though extended school year goes past the June 30th deadline. Again, you would want to include this scenario in your student exit survey list. The next scenario is a student with an IEP who has met all of the graduation requirements with the exception of failing his last social studies class. The student is scheduled to take the class over the summer, and it is anticipated that the student will pass the class and receive his diploma. You would want to include this student in your exit population as well. Remember, in both of those scenarios, you should include these students as leavers for the 1920 school year, and you would be expected to complete an exit survey on them. And then if by some chance, such as in scenario 2, the student does not pass the summer class and graduate, when the student is on your list as a post-survey for the next school year, you would just state that the student did not exit school during the 1920 school year, and you would not be expected to complete a post-school survey. We remind you that it's better to err on the side of caution and administer the exit survey by putting these students as potential leavers and fix it during the post process, because we cannot add them back in if they did leave and you didn't include them. We often get asked the question whether or not LEAs have to complete exit surveys for students who attend different schools. Please note that if you have a student listed on your December 1st, 2018 child count, and they are receiving special education funding for these students, the answer to the question is yes. Specifically, students that attend private schools, career tech ed centers, alternative education for disruptive youth facilities, and even youth that are incarcerated, you still need to complete surveys on those students. The only time that you would not complete a survey is if you have a student who is within your district residence but attends a charter or cyber charter school. Then the charter or cyber charter would be the LEA for that student. If you are including the child on your December child count, you are responsible for the survey. So we want to talk a little bit and remind you about the PaPOS process being a 2-year process. This slide shows you what information you'll be collecting on the student leavers for this school year. One of the first steps you'll be doing is updating any demographic information which is pre-populated from your December 1st, 2018 child count. You're going to be adding a coding reason for the reason the student left during this school year. So specifically, did that student graduate, age out, drop out, or receive a GED? You'll be filling out information about the classes and activities completed for the child during high school, what accommodations the student received in high school, and contact information for post-school follow-up. This information that you collect on contact information is probably the most critical information you'll collect, and you'll want to make sure that you keep good documentation of this information and make the student aware that you would be following up with them next school year so that they're prepared when you reach out to them during the 2021 school year. The names for the students will be issued when we open the online reporting that opens, the window opens in Leader Services in March. Prior to that window opening, we will be completing another webinar to walk you through how to use the Leader Services system. That being said, you should be aware that in the interim you have the copy of the paper survey, which you should be using on any student who drops out or any student who graduates or is completing a GED in between now and when the online survey window opens. If students graduated in 2019, you do not need to complete the exit survey for them. We are only completing the survey for those students who will be exiting during this current school year, June 2020. This slide shows you the information that you'll be completing during the post-school survey, which is what you'll be doing next school year. So you will be following up with questions specific to post-secondary education history, employment history, and some probes if the student is not employed or in any post-secondary education or training program. In addition, there will be some questions on the student's independent living status that you will complete. At this time, I'm going to turn the presentation over to my colleague Lisa to share a little bit of information about the supports that we have available for you.
Thank you, Hillary, and good morning. I'm Lisa Russo at the Patton East here in Malvern. And just so you all know, there are systems of support for you, so you are not in this alone. As we built the system, we incorporated various levels of support for our LEAs. Specifically, there is support through both Patton's education consultants and the intermediate units transition consultants. And as we showed you at the beginning of the presentation, if you do not know who these folks are, you can refer to the IU and the Patton Consultants support structure for the PaPOS document. Feel free to contact any of those folks to help you better understand this process. Thanks, Hillary. Sorry. Thanks for moving the slide. Last year, when you participated in the exit survey, you received strategies on how to contact those hard to find youth. National Technical Assistance Center on Transition suggests focusing on the following areas when planning for and getting in touch with youth 1 year outside of high school. Provide pre-notification, create familiarity, show interest when conducting the survey, and also provide incentives. While students are still in high school, it is important that they understand that there are things that you can do now to make the process go smoothly next year. Specifically, you can discuss the survey with the students, share previous survey results with the students, include survey information with other important information sent home with students, provide information about the survey at the final IEP meeting, establish and ask students to join a social media site, one that you might have created through Facebook. Maybe you made a page for everyone to join so that you can contact them next year, not your personal social media account, and ask youth to identify a person they would want to hear from after graduation. Some more pre-notification strategies. As I said, you can use private messages on Facebook or Twitter to verify contact information, remind students of the importance of the survey, and inform them of the timeline for completing the survey. You can also mail personalized and signed letters explaining the survey process in hand-addressed white envelopes 1 to 2 weeks prior to the survey. Avoid generic form letters and windowed envelopes. To create familiarity, explain to the students that they are helping other students. Show specific examples, share surveys with students and families, teach students the vocabulary that will be used in the survey, practice completing the questionnaire, and identify a person with a strong relationship with the student and have them intervene with the student. So having that person that has a relationship with that student, it doesn't have to be you contacting the student. It can be anyone at the LEA that might have a strong relationship with that student. Show interest when conducting the survey. So when you do contact the students, you want to be enthusiastic when calling your youth and families. Be interested in the answers the youth provide and convey a non-judgmental tone when talking with youth. And read the interview with varied voice inflection. Provide incentives. You want to remind students their answers will help others and other students. They will provide information about jobs, colleges, and services students might be eligible for, and give donated certificates from local restaurants or businesses to the hardest to find youth. And you might come up with your own incentives for your students. Again, you know your students well. As part of the posted resources, you will find this document, Strategies to Contact Youth for the PaPOS Process Lessons Learned from PA Schools. We wanted to remind you that you have this as a resource to assist in this process. Previously, we asked PA LEAs that had over 90% completion rate for the post-school surveys to participate in a focus group where we asked the LEAs what strategies they used to get such great results. The focus group's feedback is shared with you on this document, and we hope that you find it useful as you go through the process with your students. So let's review how to get started, the expectations moving forward. During this webinar, we will review the PaPOS background and then walk you through using the Leader Services system for entering surveys. Your login information, identified LEA contacts will receive an email that shows both the username and password during the week of 2/27/20. The IU tags were asked to gather at least one primary and one secondary contact per LEA. Those identified will receive this email. All contact information that was provided to us will get the same login information. If you choose to share that login information with others, that is your choice. You can begin entering data in the Leader Services system beginning of 3/1/2020. Here are some dates for you to remember. Beginning March 1st through that window of May 31st, you can start completing the exit surveys with your students and submitting them via Leader Services. However, we will be looking at one benchmark date of May 1st to let you know your status of completing the surveys. But remember, all exit surveys need to be completed by May 29th, 2020. Your number one priority at this time is to be sure that you are administrating surveys to any students who drop out or graduate before the end of the year. This should be done with a paper survey that we gave you. As an LEA, you should begin thinking about who in your LEA will be responsible for collecting and entering survey information, as well as how and when this will take place. Thinking about this now can alleviate stress during the data entry period and expedite completion of surveys. So on or after March 5th, you can start entering student information into Leader Services. Leader Services URL for the exit survey is on the screen. I suspect many of you who are special education administrators are used to using Leader Services, as many of our state reporting is submitted using their site. After you log into this website, you will enter the username and password that will be sent to your email of the week of 2/27/2020. And then once you've gotten into Leader Services system, and if you have any questions regarding the electronic submission process, please contact Leader Services directly at the email. It will be on the screen when you go onto the URL of Leader Services, and they have a phone number and also an email that you can contact them with. So at this time, we'll be taking any questions regarding.
Thanks, Lisa. There is a question regarding the online survey and who is doing the online survey. And so we did kind of answer this question earlier. The list of students will be pre-populated for you in Leader Services, and you will have access to the Leader Services system on March 1st. That being said, you do know who your students who are expected to leave this school year are, or you will be aware of students who drop out or obtaining a GED or are aging out, and you should have that information based on your rosters. So what you want to do is for those students who are dropping out before the online survey window opens, or any student who graduates before the online survey window opens, or any student who receives a GED prior to the online survey window opening, you are going to want to complete a paper survey, which I'm expecting you should be able to see, but let me just confirm and do a new share so that you can see it. The paper survey is one of the handouts that was provided to you today and is available on the Patent site. So specifically regarding questions about who is doing this, that is what we're saying is an LEA by LEA decision. So between now and March, as an LEA, you really want to make sure that you are thinking about who in your school is going to be completing this process and who in your school is going to be entering the information online. That has looked different in many schools. In some schools, the transition coordinator completes the surveys and enters the information. In some schools, the transition coordinator completes the surveys, but maybe a secretary or support staff member is entering the information in the online system. That is an internal process that you have to decide about what works best for your LEA. One of the things that we'll talk about in the webinar in February is how to get rid of students who make that list that should not actually be on your sample. So again, we talked about that sample will include any students who were age 16 to 20 on your December 1st, 2018 child count. So that's going to include lots of students who aren't actually leaving this school year. So you need to rectify that by looking at who you're expecting as leavers for this school year, and we'll walk you through a process for coding any students who are non-leavers. This survey is only for students who are leaving high school, not for middle school students. And if students exit special education services during this school year, you would not be coding them as a leaver either. So again, middle school students should not be coded as leavers when you get into the online system, and neither should students who exit special education. There is a question about whether or not a district can use their own digital survey to eliminate paper forms. You can use, and you have to have the same questions that are on the blank form that we've provided you, but however you collect that information is up to you. Now I will say you don't want to start giving this survey to students who are staying with you for the entire school year until closer to graduation. The window opens in March, but most of your students won't graduate until the end of May or June, and you want to be administering this as close to the point when they're actually exiting as possible. Next year, when you are actually going to be doing the post-survey, you can't be administering the post-survey till 1 year after your graduation date. There was a question about why students who might be in middle school could populate onto the list. That is because the only way we can pre-populate data for you is based on the child count, and we cannot whittle it down that specifically. So it is the best that we can do with a December child count information that is provided. And most of those students, they're typically, I'm not saying there can't be, but there typically isn't a 16-year-old in middle school. So it wouldn't typically be middle school students that are on your sampling list. So in terms of email notices regarding when and what to complete, you'll get a pen link reminding you to participate and register for the February webinar. In addition, at that time, right after that webinar, within that week, you should get an email with your username and password, which will remind you of the process for when the survey window opens. As Lisa mentioned, during the midpoint of the survey window, so at the beginning of May, you will get a reminder about where you are in the process. So what is your % of total surveys completed? And what we typically do leading up towards the end of the timeline is contact the IU transition consultants, and we remind them of their the status of the LEAs within their IU, and we ask them to follow up with you. That's ample notification, but in addition, if you go back in the PowerPoint to one of the last slides that Lisa shared, it had all of the dates to remember. I would really strongly suggest that you keep that dates to remember slide kind of handy for you, because that will give you, and you could go so far as to put those dates in your calendar, because that will be your cue to remember things that you should be doing in this process. In addition, I mentioned that this webinar is recorded, so it will be stored on the patent website. When you go to the patent website, let me share my screen again, because I seem to have problems switching between. When you go to the patent website, if you go under graduation and post-secondary outcomes, and then secondary transition, you'll see a slide or a slot specifically for post-school outcomes with a drop-down. The PaPOS trainings will be archived under that link. And then in addition, those 2 documents that we shared with you, the strategies for contacting hard-to-find youth, are also available to you there on the website as well. So currently what is here are the old recordings. This 9/22/2018 will be replaced by today's webinar. So you'll be able to capture the content from today's webinar if you have additional questions. Also, as you go through the process, we encourage you to really think about reaching out to your local IU TAC for support. And if you're not able to resolve it at your IU level, then you can reach out to your regional patent consultants, which are provided on the slide, the last slide of the PowerPoint we have for you, contact information for your patent consultants as well. Let me share that screen with you. So you should now be able to see your regional patent consultant information. In terms of who emails will be sent to, as Lisa mentioned, we get a list of contacts for PaPOS from the IUs. So your IU TAC should be reaching out to you soon with regard to who in your LEA should be receiving the user login and password, as well as the email. So be on the lookout for information coming to you from your IU TAC soon, so that we can collect who from your LEA is the responsible person. And again, I'm sharing with you our contact information. We do ask that you try to resolve through your IU and then your regional patent consultant before working through the PaPOS at patentpgh.net. And that is because we are having some issues with an email migration specific to that email. So I think we've answered most of the questions as they've come through. We are available to you as supports as you go through this process. And we will, oh, I see a hand raised. William, I saw your hand raised, but if you're able to please put your question in the Q&A as opposed to raising your hand, it makes it easier than having to try to unmute people as they're participating. But as I mentioned, you have access to the 3 patent offices, the recording of the PowerPoint, and all of the handouts that we provided to you today. So the link for the handouts was in the chat. I will repost it in today's chat. Give me 1 second to go back up. The handouts are found on the patent training calendar under today's event. If you go to the link that I'm posting in the chat right now and you look to the right-hand side, you will see event files, and you can download these things from the event files. Okay, so some additional questions are coming in Are we doing the exit survey with students who graduated in 2019 or 2020? You are doing the survey with students who are graduating during this school year, not last school year, so by June 2020. Can a student who reaches 21 be coded as receiving a high school diploma? You would code them as aging out even though they're receiving a high school diploma because they are receiving it as they age out. That's the answer that we've received from the Bureau in the past. So even if they're receiving a diploma, they're aging out at 21. And I think that's the same question that we just had. Again, we thank you for your questions, for your attention today, and we look forward to providing any support you may need as you go through this process. Thanks and have a great day.